Hey dancers, welcome back to Broche Banter, your home for thought-provoking conversations about pursuing a beautiful art form in adulthood. In this episode, we take a little different turn and we actually explore the exciting world of West Coast swing with teacher and coach Tashina King. I wanted to interview Tashina for the show today because she and I teach so many similar things about learning something challenging in adulthood. We wanted to compare notes and give you a super awesome inspiration to share that you're not alone. All dance forms have the same issues and challenges when learning as an adult. Not to mention, in this episode, you will discover why this unique partner dance stands out. West Coast swing is a style that's constantly evolving, encouraging self-expression and creativity. Our wonderful guest, Tashina, shares inspiring stories of her students' remarkable transformations through dance, revealing how it truly has the power to transform not only our presence and mindset while we dance, but also our lives in general. Tune in to reconnect with the joy of movement, to stay motivated and remember that you are worthy of having what you want both on and off the dance floor. If you're anything like me, you'll probably be Googling West Coast Swing by the end of the episode. If you're curious to learn more, check out the show notes for your free West Coast Swing starter kit from Tashina. And with that, I hope you enjoy this super fun episode. Welcome to the show, Tashina. I'm so happy to have you on Broche Banter today. Thanks so much for being here.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
I'm really looking forward to chatting with you today because you work with people who started social dances as adults, swing dancing as an adult. And in ballet, starting as an adult is unusual. Starting as a child is more usual. But in your world, starting as an adult is a bit more normal and accepted. And starting as a child is a bit different. So we have a lot of overlap in the things that we work with our dancers on with starting as an adult, and really excited to dive into some of those details with you. So tell me about what's a typical journey like for somebody getting started in your world?
Oh man, that really ranges, but the style of dance I focus on primarily is called West Coast Swing. And so it's a partner dance and it's a very social dance. So unlike ballroom where it's waltz and tango and foxtrot, rumba, those types of styles, where you learn the patterns and the techniques, and then it's all very set. In West Coast Swing, you learn the basics, but there is a ton of room for your individual expression and your individual interpretation of the music that you're dancing to. And it's a learned dance, so you and your partner both know the basics and the set of patterns and various variations that could be created. But because of the nature of the dance and how two people really are creating, I like to say, a piece of art that will never be able to be recreated again. And it can turn into something that you didn't originally plan, both from the leader's perspective and the follower's perspective. So with the expansion and explosion of social media, especially first starting with like MySpace and then Facebook and YouTube, West Coast Swing started to gain more popularity overseas, over in the European areas first, really. But really, I would say probably since COVID times with TikTok, the dance has expanded even more. And so people are scrolling their phones and seeing these improv style partner dances and are inspired by the fact that it is a very welcoming community globally for people of all walks of life, all career paths, all ages, all body styles. And so there's a lot of adults that come into the community for West Coast Swing who've always wanted to dance or always thought that it would be cool to do that. And they're seeing examples of how there's people like them that are doing the dance. And so there's that initial breakthrough of maybe some self-sabotaging thoughts or fears of, well, if somebody like that can do it, I see myself in that person. I kind of look like them, or I'm kind of their same age. And so they initially have that breakthrough of, well, maybe I can do it too. So they're starting to, research on Google or whatever, where they could go to take classes. And so adults are coming into the West Coast Swing community throughout the world at various stages of adulthood to learn how to dance. And it's an ever evolving dance too, which is unlike ballroom. Ballroom really hasn't evolved. The patterns that were what they were years ago are still what they are now, as are their techniques. But West Coast swing evolves largely based on the style of music that is very popular at the time. And so the dance does not look the same as it did 20, 30 years ago as it does now. And so people also love the fact that the dance can be danced to a various set of genres of music. It's not just one style of music.
Wow, it's a whole different landscape. In ballet, the one of the biggest stressors is memorizing choreography. And this kind of has the opposite actually of improvising choreography and really truly thinking on your feet, so to speak.
Yes, it's a very different skill set. I started in ballet and jazz, tap, hip hop, like all solo styles of movement. And that was one of the hardest parts for me coming into West Coast swing was that it was so improvised once you got the basic patterns down.
Wow, that's so fascinating. So the patterns the same over time and they just get put together differently based on the music, or what parts of it are evolving with the styles of music and with the times? That's so fascinating.
The basic patterns I would say do stay the same, but how they're danced stay evolving. That's the consistent pieces. It's constantly evolving the how of you dance it. So how the body moves, how you transfer weight from one foot to the next slightly changes based upon the speed of the music of what's popular at that time. Several years ago, the dance was starting to become heavily influenced by Brazilian zouk. So there was a lot more zouk-like movement in the head and in the upper chest and rib cage area. Still there, but it's not as prevalent as it was before. So it just depends on what other styles and what other people are coming into the community from other styles that are also bringing in their previous training that can influence the dance quite a bit.
Wow. So what makes up the style if it's so versatile? What makes it West Coast swing versus something else?
There's a few factors that make it specific to West Coast swing. There are 6 count and 8 count basic patterns. One of the defining characteristics as well is that the follower, which is men or women now, it's not near as traditional as women are the followers, men are the leaders. It's very, again, very just lead follow. Whatever role a person really is intrigued by, they can learn and they can do socially and they can compete that now. So the follower is the one that dances on what's called a track or a slot. And the follower passes back and forth on this track. And then the leader is providing where the follower is going, when the follower is doing it, and what is the follower doing. And then the follower gets to receive that piece of basic information, if you will, and then based on the connection that is present between the partner, the way that both partners are hearing the music and how they want to interpret the music, then they dance. And what makes it look like dancing is truly how do they interpret the music as those elements are happening. And the follower is passing the leader. There are a few patterns. So if this is the leader where the follower is returning to where they started, but a lot of the dance is based on the follower passing the leader in some capacity. And the connection of stretch is a very defining characteristic, meaning that the two partners literally will stay in a stretched connection for the majority of the dance. There's one other type of connection called compression, but it's not near as prevalent. And so that is a defining characteristic that makes West Coast swing look like it does. And socially, there can be some what's called rides where the followers' feet might come slightly off the floor and the leader's in a weight supported movement. But most of the time socially, there's not lifts or there's not a bounce that happens like you would have in, say, East Coast swing, where there's a lilt that occurs. West Coast swing is a more where the head stays level throughout the entire dance.
Wow, that's so fascinating. What fun. It sounds like a game. It sounds like a game you play with each other. Like it just sounds super fun.
It is. It's a lot of fun.
You're about to convert me here in the course of this podcast. It sounds super fun. So when people start as an adult in this style of dance, how are those beginning classes for them? Are they sometimes overwhelmed with a lot of information, or is it super fun right off the bat, or maybe a combination of both? Like, what are those early days like for somebody starting this style of movement?
I think it largely depends on the instructor that the
Okay.
individual has,
Huh.
and the atmosphere that the instructor creates for the student.
Hmm.
And I think a lot of it also depends on the mentality of the individual taking the classes,
Hmm.
which is, so I do a lot of mindset work and training with people who do it, the dance competitively, but also who just do it socially for fun. And the biggest thing that I'd say probably gets in the way for people when they start is an expectation to get it right or to be perfect at it right off the bat.
Mm-hmm.
So when a person is more open-minded, more patient with themselves, and stays more open and curious to the process, it tends to be less frustrating for the individual. But when there's those more intense pressures coming from within themselves to perfect it right away, then it can be a more frustrating experience.
Mm-hmm.
But what I love about West Coast Swing is there are always layers of technique and understanding that can always be added. So most classes start with the very simple, you know, basic introduction concepts of the dance and the patterns and just basic movement.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Where ballet has the same sort of expectation challenge that people go through in the beginning. Why do you think we come into something new expecting to already be really polished at it? Where does that come from? Why do we have that?
Largely because of our, I think, culture, our family upbringing, society. And when I had you on as a guest for my mindset program, the topic got brought up of we forget what it's like when we're little to not have those expectations. And as when we're little, we're just there to learn and we're in that phase constantly of learning and picking up new information. And then as we grow older, we start to have expectations that are placed on us by our parents or our grandparents. We start comparing ourselves to our friends in school and
Mm,
maybe in our other dance classes or in our other sports or choir or art classes or whatever it is that we may partake in as we're growing up. The comparisonitis starts to kick in.
mm-hmm.
And especially with social media now, we tend to only see one side of a person's story.
Right.
Like, here's a video of when I started, and a year later, here's what I look like doing XYZ activity. And we perceive that that person must have had this easy journey. It's portrayed in a way that doesn't give us the full depth and understanding of what it is that that person likely went through to get from point A to point B to then to point C. We only see the highlighted moments. So I
Mhm.
think it's created this very skewed perception and expectation that we then create for ourselves even more as adults that we should be able to get it.
It's almost like we wish that it would be like one of those montages from the 80s, like those super cheesy montages where it would be this really great music and in like 30 seconds you become a boxer or like you become whatever it is in
Right.
that period of time where like, the concept of like MTV made back in the day where it's like you just transform in a very short period of time, which is not a realistic, not necessarily a realistic expectation to put on ourselves in something that
No.
takes quite some time and a lot of time to develop a taste and to develop the nuances of something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's largely based on our own prior experiences
Yeah.
of learning things too. In the work that I do, I focus a lot on subconscious beliefs
Mhm.
and nervous system imprints. And so how our experience of learning and picking up new information when we were younger plays into our experience of learning and applying new information as an adult.
Mhm.
So if one child, let's say, this happened with one of my clients, a gymnast, and loved doing gymnastics, but her family, especially the mother, was always saying, why can't you be as flexible as such and such girl? Why don't your body style, why doesn't it look like her? You're not practicing hard enough. And so here's this young girl, very impressionable, from the nervous system and the subconscious perspective, constantly hearing this set of information
Mhm.
as she's learning new things, she's constantly comparing herself now because she's not only just hearing it from her mom, now she's taking that and starting to compare. And that shuts down our ability to receive new information
Right.
from a judgment-free place. And so subconsciously, what happens is we're always in the present moment. So when things like that happen in somebody's life, really early on, especially, the subconscious doesn't know the difference between when that happened at 12 years old, let's say, to when you're learning something now as an adult. And that's why people often say, I've just got that monkey chatter running in the back of my brain. And I'm looking at Susie Q next to me going, well, she's only been doing it 2 weeks. I've been doing it 4 weeks, and she's already looking so much better than I am.
Right.
It's that same, what's called nervous system set point that was created earlier
Mhm.
on in our life that impacts largely how we're able to pick up information and apply it, integrate it, create muscle memory as an adult.
So what do people do about that? How do we, what's the, like, it's so common. It's so common. And I see it too. And I think in many ways, dance attracts people who have this sort of thing that they want to get over. They want to feel free. They want to feel free in their body. And I think this often can be a limiter of why you don't feel free. Right. And so you're kind of attracted to this feeling. And so I think it's particularly common in our space. So how, without spoiling all of your secrets, how do you work with somebody to improve that and to be open to receiving the information and to be open to actually developing new neural, pathways and muscle memory and all of that? How do you open someone up?
A lot of it has to do with the person's willingness to get over it. Like if and when the person is ready to have a new experience, they tend to have enough, call it pain or frustration, that pushes them into going, okay, I've tried everything else. This is something I really want. Okay, what am I missing? What else is out there? What else is possible? And when we enter into that headspace, typically I find that the thing that works for them comes into their awareness or into their field, or a friend says, hey, check this out. So just being ready and willing to get over your shit, basically, like whatever shit is holding you back, is really the first step. But specifically for me, and the way that I work with clients is a particular set of processes where we can update, if you will, the subconscious beliefs from something disempowering, limiting, self-sabotaging into ones that are empowering, uplifting, and moves the person forward
Mm,
in their life. And I work with people outside of dance too. So it is amazing what dance can bring up for us that is a mirror to other areas of our life. So
absolutely.
I have a lot of conversations like that with clients. And then we talk about, what is your main goal? Like, what set of beliefs would you need to have operating automatically in the subconscious in order to affect the change that you're wanting and the goals that you're wanting to experience and have? And then I've trained in a specific modality that literally updates the subconscious beliefs. And then I also help them learn different nervous system regulating tools as well to support those moments of transition as we're doing the subconscious work. So I do that in a more one-on-one capacity, the subconscious transformation work. But a lot of it can also just be conversation at a conscious level perspective and being aware of what are the stories that we tell ourselves. And in a story that we tell ourselves, there's always a fact of what happened. And then there's the side of, what did we make that mean?
Mm.
And what do we tell ourselves about the fact that we then buy into and keep playing on repeat? And once we have some conscious awareness about that, that can start to, again, further erode the limiting, self-limiting talk that we have.
Hmm. Yeah, I think one quote that I love is, how you do anything is how you do everything. And this idea that how you approach a difficult thing in one circumstance is going to be the same way you approach in a different circumstance. I think there are some things that are easier for us to approach without some of those limiting things that maybe came a little bit more easily or really aren't that difficult, right? But when you really are faced with something difficult and challenging, it's amazing how it's like the same thoughts with just a slightly different context. It's the same idea. It's the same identical feeling. If you actually think about what does this feel like in my body, and you think, well, I feel my stomach hurting, I feel heavy in my body, or whatever you feel, it's like the same sensation, but with a different location. So it's so interesting how, especially in somewhere that can feel a little bit lower stakes like dance. I mean, it's high stakes because we really want it, but it's not like your family's on the line or your career is on the line or some
Right.
of those things where you feel you can experiment a little bit more and you can play with some of these new things. Then you take it to the rest of your life and you think, oh, I'm feeling all of this a little bit differently now. This is a different experience than it was before because you can bring it up. If you can bring it up, then you can look at it, and it's actually, I find dance to be an amazing place to bring up all of those difficult things and work through them in your
Yes.
own safe space that for us, it's at the ballet bar, it's your own like little home where you can work through all this stuff and then take it back out into the world. And it's a whole new set of thoughts and a whole new person.
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely. Yeah.
So when you work with somebody who's competing, what are the different mindset issues that you face with going into competition? Because that's got comparison built into it. That's got, the point of it is kind of to compare yourself to somebody else in some sense. So how do you help people with a competition mindset, with performing under pressure, with wanting to do well, with watching back the video afterwards, with that whole process that goes along with competing?
There's so many layers to it because there's so many facets to the idea of competition.
Mm-hmm.
In the style of West Coast swing, there are two major competition types. One is called a Jack and Jill, and that is where you have a particular level that you compete in. And then in that level, when it's your time to compete, you're paired with a random partner 3 different times, and each time you get a random song. So
Wow.
there's a whole other layer to that too, because you're
Right.
introducing a whole element of somebody I may have never danced with or I've never danced with competitively.
Right.
Maybe that person is more experienced in that level or division, and maybe you're brand new or vice versa. So even within a given level, there's different levels.
Yeah.
Um, and I would say kind of the big things that stand out are I want to give my partner a good dance. There's oftentimes this very deeply ingrained people pleasing aspect, and it can conflict with, but how do I stand out? How do I showcase myself? Because up until finals, you're judged as an individual. You're not judged as the partnership.
I see.
So you have to, at some level, be able to be confident in the skill sets that you have and showcase them while still having good partnership
Right.
skill sets and techniques. And when one partner is, let's say, super, super nervous and they're stepping off time and the connection is all the crap and things like that, the other partner has to question, okay, how can I work with this scenario and still do my best given what I have?
Because they're still competing individually to get to the next level and to get to the next, quarterfinals or whatever it would be.
Exactly. Yeah.
Mm.
So there's a lot of element of that dynamic. I want to give my partner a good dance.
Yep.
I don't want to be a bad partner, but how do I also showcase my strengths and balance with their strengths or their weaknesses and all of that? And then the part of I really want to be successful. I want the judges to see me, but it's fascinating to me when we start having conversation, how many people are actually scared of being seen.
Mm.
So there's this like 1 foot on the gas, 1 foot on the brake component that's happening within them. Because if they then make it to the next rounds in many divisions, the finals are danced in what's called a spotlight, where it's just them and their paired random partner on the floor at a time. So then all eyeballs all are on them.
Yeah.
Or maybe there's like another two couples, depending on how things are danced and the level that you're competing in. So there's this I want to succeed. I want to make finals, but then this holy crap, I'm really scared of being seen and everyone's looking at me? And what if I mess up? And what if I make a mistake? And what if I fail? So there's that component that's pretty typical that
Mhm.
we explore. And because West Coast Swing is such a personally expressed dance, it's very vulnerable for people to put their creativity, their ideas, their interpretation out onto the floor
Right.
to be judged, especially if we're in competition. So there's that fear of someone else affirming for them that their ideas are dumb, their ideas aren't good enough, which just triggers or adds salt to the wound of probably something else that happened earlier on in their life, where that initial emotional trauma may not be a big T trauma, maybe it could be little T trauma, happened for that person. So, those are kind of the three areas that I say show up pretty frequently when it
Yeah.
comes to West Coast Swing competition. And again, the first step in working with a person to move past those is to become aware consciously of what is it that you're really afraid of.
Hmm.
Not just this looming, I want to do better, but I'm not making finals. Okay, well, why aren't you making finals? Yes, there might be some technical elements that you're missing that you need to train further, but there's also the emotional side of things because our subconscious is responsible for 95% of our experience.
Mm.
It's responsible for how we train, the experience of how we retain information, our behaviors, our actions, our non-actions, our thoughts, our feelings. So everything that leads us up to the competition, our subconscious is responsible for how we're experiencing those outward elements.
Yep.
And then when we get to the competition, we have to have those conversations if the person isn't doing well, if they're struggling, of what is it that's really holding you back that's up to this point, and even in that point.
And it's amazing how the subconscious is so big on whether you go all in or not. Like even if you think you're going all in and you want to work really hard and you want to make it really great, your limit, your fear or whatever it is that you have underlying it just stops you from lining everything up how your body knows to do it, or stops you from entering that beautiful flow state where everything is just moving so freely and flowing, which I think what we're all really craving in so many ways is that beautiful, wonderful flow state. But that fear and that doubt and that uncertainty right under the level just like stops you from diving down into that place to access that wonderful state that we all have the ability to find. Just
Yeah,
stops
and
cold.
that's because our nervous system is part of our subconscious operations. And our nervous system is designed to keep us safe.
Mm-hmm.
And what is safe to us is what is familiar and known, even if it's not what we consciously want.
Mm.
So this was a really powerful example for me in working with a client several years ago. He came to me because he primarily was doing social dancing and just wanted to have a good time going out social dancing. He wanted to feel confident going up and asking women to dance.
Mm-hmm.
He wanted to feel like a strong leader, not physical, like brute strength, but just a good, solid presence in his body. He wanted to really embrace that more masculine aspect of leading. But he was really, really struggling with that.
Mm-hmm.
And so we got into some conversation, and it came up that when he was younger, his father was very, especially verbally, abusive.
Mm.
But even at times, some physical abuse was present. So, from a nervous system perspective, what he knew to keep him safe was to stay silent, to not be seen, and to not make a splash, not to upset or insert himself into a situation.
Right. Just stay out of it.
Just stay out of it,
Mm.
basically be invisible.
Right.
Don't have a voice. So that was his nervous system setting. And so everything he had done in his life up to that had been based off of that setting to keep
Mm-hmm.
him safe. So enter this grown man into the social dance world where in order to ask a woman to dance, you have to vocally go up and ask her to dance.
And insert yourself right into that. Like,
Insert yourself
yeah,
right
yeah,
into the situation.
right.
You have to be visible.
Mm-hmm.
And, there's layers that could be added into that of, well, another man is seeing me ask this woman to dance. Is that her husband? Is that a boyfriend? Is that a friend? Like there's all these other safety factors. So for him to
Right.
physically go up and ask somebody to dance, if he did that, then to get on the floor and dance and then put his ideas out there, which were always shot down as a
Right.
kid and oftentimes got him in trouble. Everything in his nervous system said, that is not safe. I'm going to keep you safe. So that meant being a fly on the wall at the social dance, never going up to, well, rarely going up to people and asking them to dance, and just sitting there wishing for something different, being invisible. So it was not so much about learn this technique, add more patterns to your repertoire, or any of that posture, frame, connection. It had nothing to do with that. It had everything to do of his goal of having a fun social dance experience, of working through the pain and trauma that had occurred when he was younger, and helping his nervous system set point reset to a place where it was safe to be seen, it was safe to vocalize, it was safe to put yourself out there.
Yeah.
And once we got to that point, he then had a much easier time going up and asking people to dance and just talking about the ripple effects it has in other areas of our life. He's gone on to write a book. So he's
Wow.
published a book, which has put his name out there even more.
Yeah.
It has had profound ripple effects positively in other areas of his life too.
Oh, that's incredible. Good for him. That's a great happy ending to a surely very difficult and very painful beginning. But like you said, sometimes that pain is what really drives you onto the other side when that pain gets so bad, when you feel so like,
Mhm.
does it have to be like this? I really want something more. I really think I can do something more. And that pain can drive you to actually look for something that would be way, way, way better than that. I think where we see a lot of this with starting ballet is so much of ballet is changing how you stand, right? So
Mhm.
changing your posture, changing if you're leaning one way or another, if you've got one leg slightly shorter, your pelvis is off kilter, or changing the way you stand. And when your body feels off balance, it's very scary and you feel like you're going to fall onto the floor, and your body will automatically revert back to a comfortable posture over and over and over and over again, because you just feel like you're going to fall, right? Like that's obviously why we use the ballet bar, to let us make these changes and feel more comfortable and safe while trying to make these changes. But it's so interesting that you have to recalibrate somebody's mind from like, this feels this feels very off balance, but I can see that if it's actually fine. Like it's all a recalibrating of their mind's idea of where their body is in space. It's like just
Yes.
this recalibration. And it sounds like you have a lot of I mean, it sounds like a lot of recalibration aspects to do, especially with this person who you just mentioned, with this story, where it's like you recalibrate, this is dangerous and scary, and I might be whatever bad thing is going to happen, insert here. Then you recalibrate it to like, this is normal and I'm fine. Like you have to reset the dial on all of
Yes, yeah, exactly.
that.
Yep. And I
Refine
use
what
that
neutral is.
analogy of a dial quite frequently, or like a thermostat setting.
Mm, yeah. Like it's way dialed up. We got to get back to like room temperature.
Yeah. Yep.
When you well, okay, so I'm actually curious. You said there was two types of competition. We've got the Jack
Oh,
Jill type. I'm actually curious because in my head I was like, wait, there's a second type. What is it? I want to hear about it.
the second one is called Strictly, and it's still all improv based, but it's
Okay,
where you pick your partner for that specific competition.
I see.
So those are the two social style competitions that are available in West Coast Swing. And then there are the choreographed routine divisions.
Yeah,
And there's classic, where your feet stay on the floor for the follower. And then there's showcase, where usually it's the follower. The follower needs to have a certain amount of lifts where both feet come off the floor,
I see.
and a certain height off the floor.
Yeah. Okay, so improvisation is a whole other thing, because improvisation obviously has, like you said, your own ideas and your own creativity and putting things together and having enough knowledge that you can see, when I'm doing this, these are the options that could come next, to put into improvisation. And I think, with ballet, so many dancers never even get to improvisation, or never even get to making their own choreography, because you're so used to it being fed to you. You're so used to
Yeah.
always having to do exactly what somebody else tells you, that you don't even start to develop your own creativity and your own like ideas about how things go together, right? I think every ballet dancer's nightmare is when the teacher says, and then do your own thing for 8 counts. And then they're just like melted on the floor, right? Because it's so
Right.
scary. So
Let's
it's
just do
really
a port de bras for 8 counts and we'll just call it
right. I'll balance
good.
in the susu and just chill here for a moment. So I'm really curious, what are some ways that, I mean, I guess it's just probably normal and accepted that improvisation is part of this, but what are some ways that you use to help people feel comfortable their first time putting a few steps together or their first time saying, like, I want to do this move and then this move and then this move? Like, how do you help people? I'm curious for my own teaching. How do you help people get through that and get into actually creating? Because it's so fun to create. It's so fun, but it's so scary in the beginning.
For a lot of people, because we're so used to being spoon-fed exactly what to do, I myself put together a series of styling videos for followers where throughout the basic patterns, I videotaped instructional videos of here are literally 100 different things you could do with your body to different genres of music in
Huh.
the same pattern.
Yeah.
So I gave them something to start practicing because the other thing is, as adults, if you're starting dance for the first time, most adults don't really know their body. They
No,
don't understand what their body's capable of. They're not connected to their body in
no.
many ways. And that's one of the beautiful things I think dancing brings us at any stage of life, but is a deeper connection to our own vessel that physically expresses in the
Yeah.
world. Um, so by giving the dancers an example of what they could do within the same pattern just
Yeah.
helps to expand their vocabulary of
Hmm.
what the body could do, how it could move, how it could interpret the music. So that's really helpful is just having some examples and things that they could do over and over again so they could experiment with, okay, here's an action of my rib cage right to left done in this certain rhythm, but I can play with the size of it. I could play with the rhythm of it. So I can still go, right, forward, left, but the rhythm that I do it in changes based
Hmm.
upon what's happening in the music, based upon the size that feels right in the moment based upon the connection.
Hmm.
So a lot of it is just giving them experience or an opportunity to experience their body in multiple movements and ways.
Yeah.
And then once a person gets a little bit more familiar with that, I typically don't love continuing to give more of that because I find that most people then get really latched on to trying to replicate that exact same thing
Right.
regardless of the style of music, but then it doesn't match the music. It doesn't match what's happening in the moment. So
Hmm.
it's just a tool. And then at that point, we really start to talk about, at least in the way that I work in my magnetic movement method, of what makes you unique as a person. What makes you you?
That's
Are you
tough for people to
playful?
answer.
It really
That's
is.
really tough for people to answer. They're easier to ask their friend, what makes me unique, than they am to say themselves, like, here's what makes me unique.
Yep. Which is exactly why I ask them, because really West Coast swing is a dance of individuals.
Hmm.
That's what makes the dance so attractive to so many people is the person gets to be themselves in the dance.
I see.
But in order to do that, you have to know who you are. You have to identify what it is that makes you you. Like, are you sassy? Are you playful? Are you subtle? Are you, um, really out there and loud? Or are you a little bit more with drawn in and captivating? And then based upon that, how can you apply those qualities about yourself to the set movements that you might have already been playing with
Hmm.
as a layer? One of my favorite things to do just in a styling class is have people walk across the floor, much like we would do, in a ballet class or jazz class, um, and say, pick two qualities that you like about yourself. If you can, pick two qualities that you love about yourself. But usually people can only get to the like part. And now I put on the song, whatever song I have at the moment, and I say, pick one of those qualities and walk across the floor, really embracing that quality.
Hmm.
And then I play the same song and I say, walk across the floor, embracing that second quality about yourself. And just how they move starts to change. Their
Hmm.
posture, how they hold their head. And then we layer in, okay, now which of those qualities might better fit the genre and feel of the song?
Yep.
So then we start to play with how does your movement change based upon how you want to be in the dance, inspired by the music that's playing,
Mm-hmm.
and taking the movements that we've already explored, but letting them be influenced by you being sassy or sexy or playful and goofy. They look different. The same move physically of the body will look different based upon what's fueling the movement.
Mm-hmm. It's yeah, so fascinating. It's so fascinating. And it sounds like it's the steps are really secondary to the styling and to the personality in the dancer as you're watching them dance. Like the steps are just the base, and then you're playing on top of it with who
Yeah.
you are and trying to match the music and let the music create the movement versus stressing so much about the particular steps. Like it sounds like it's so much about the artistic presence of it all, which is so fun and freeing, but also terrifying in the beginning. Like probably just, I bet listening to you say that you asked them to walk across the floor, some people's palms start to sweat, just
Oh,
even
yeah.
listening to that, just even listening to that suggestion.
Yep. Yeah, and all those things you just mentioned are signs of a dysregulated nervous system, which means
Mm,
the person is coming outside of that safe zone that they're used to living in.
yeah. And, it's funny when I think about oftentimes when dancers are trying to look for what makes them unique, sometimes it's funny because you can find it when they say, you can almost find it by seeing the opposite of what they wish they were. Like so many times people wish that they were somebody else, but they really are needing to embrace themselves. So like for me, I love wearing color. I love color just so much. Non-color things like this is a boring color, but I've got sparkles on it, so it counts as colorful. But I love color, and I always wish that I was one of those people who could wear black and tan and they look so sophisticated and cool. But it's like that's like the unique part is how much I love color. But sometimes you come to it by looking at like, oh, I wish I was like that person. And you think, well, in some ways, your natural thing, if you haven't really looked at it, is just to reject what you are and look at the people who aren't like you and think, oh, I wish I was like that, or I wish I was like that person. Sometimes that's a sign of how you are unique or want to be, but sometimes it's like looking the opposite. You find like you can look and find yourself and find what's unique about yourself,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
you have to embrace it. Obviously, at that point, you're like, oh,
Yeah.
that person does it like this, I like that. But it's like sometimes look at the opposite and see if that describes you more. And then is that really something to start embracing and not try to push away?
Mm-hmm. Yep. I agree.
So I'm curious when you start to see some of these transformations happen in someone's sort of like presence and their mindset and all of that, what are some what are some things that you hear at the very beginning of all of that, like the problems that drive them to you or to seek some other solution? Like they're in a really painful state. What are they feeling? What are they experiencing at that point that leads them to be desiring a transformation process? Like what are those early challenges when they start speaking with you?
I'm not good enough,
Mm,
or I'll never be good enough. Um, Wanting to get better faster,
mm,
just this idea of progressing quicker leads a lot of people into my field, my world of having these conversations. And then especially in West Coast swing, wanting to have have their creativity unlocked. Like they so desire, because they know that's such a deeply attractive, fun part of the dance, that they want to get to that place where
mm,
they feel creative. So I'd say
mm.
that those three things are probably the main conversations that initiate a person reaching out and connecting with me. Um, but oftentimes perfectionism is a big one for other people. Imposter syndrome, feeling like they're imposter, like they don't belong and they'll never belong. That's another one. Um, and interestingly enough, this past year, I've had several people who are at their point of dance used to be really fun and joyful for me, and I've totally lost it, and I
Yeah.
don't want to lose it. Like, I don't want to quit, but I am disliking so much about my experience right now that I'm ready to quit.
Yeah.
So that's been a more recent one this year that people have connected with me through.
Hmm. Yeah, I hear that one, but almost more just. like people will describe it or identify it as like burnout or quote unquote burnout. Like, we talk, kind of hear that phrase without really being specific about what it is. Like, I'm just super burned out right now. I feel like I need a break. This sort of feeling, but yet they have that deep enough love to even bother telling you about it, to even bother bringing it up, right? Because if you really had drifted off, you would just drift off and you wouldn't come back, and it would just naturally detach. Like we've naturally detached from all kinds of things in our life that weren't
Mhm.
that sad and it just went away, but that you feel that longing enough to like reach out to someone and say, I'm really feeling a lot of burnout right now. What can I do about it? I think is when you really can tell that they care about it, but there's something blocking them in continuing there.
Mhm.
I'm curious what your take on that last one is, because it is a very interesting one that we hear in ballet. You'll see someone super dedicated. Maybe they take 6 months or a year or even 3 years and they get really, really involved and really into it. And then they think like that they're not having fun anymore. All of a sudden the expectations are too high. All of a sudden they're stuck there, or whatever the situation is. I'm curious what you experience and see.
One of the things I talk quite a bit about with my students and clients is that when we start dancing, whatever age that is, whenever that is in our life, we start with a why. And it's usually a deeper why than most people are first aware of. So a lot of people will say, well, why did you start dancing? Oh, my friend told me about this one class and I decided to go. Okay, well, that was what caused you to get off your butt and go to the class.
Right.
But why did you internally choose and make that choice
Because a
to
lot of
go take
people, a lot
the
of people told you
class?
about a lot of things that you didn't do. So why did this one thing happen?
Right. So we start with that one why. And with that why, there are usually a set of goals, whether they're consciously outlined for the person or they just kind of subconsciously have these goals that they want to achieve by learning to dance.
Yep.
And I found for many people that when they start to lose their joy or their burnout, a big reason for that is their why has changed.
Changed. Interesting.
It's morphed, it's evolved, it's no longer the same. And so the initial reasons they were going to class, the initial reasons they were practicing, the initial reasons they were going out social dancing or competing are no longer in alignment with the why that fueled those actions.
Mm.
And so when we can identify for ourselves our new why is it that I would keep continuing to dance? Then we refuel the motivation
Mm.
and we will likely have a different set of actions that then better align with that why.
Hmm. Interesting. I've never heard that changing why concept. Most people talk about losing their why or like going back and trying. The advice is often to go back and try to remember why you started as a reason why you should continue. But it's really interesting and makes a lot of sense to hear the reframe that why has possibly changed. Like in some cases, you've actually achieved the why or you've experienced the why fully, and now it's no longer important to you because you've already gotten what you needed from it. Like you did it. If the initial thing was to feel lighter on your feet and you feel lighter on your feet, that's no longer going to motivate you to keep going. So that's really interesting that possibly the advice is not to go back and look for your original why, but to cultivate your current why don't you want to quit? What's keeping you even going back to having this conversation of why you want to keep going? What are your new goals and what you're looking for? That's such an interesting perspective.
For me personally, when I've always danced. I started dancing at 2.5 in the combo classes in the mommy and me classes
Oh.
at my local studio. So I've always known I wanted to dance, but then after high school and I decided to pursue West Coast swing, um, more around age 20 is when I decided West Coast swing was the more long-term career path I wanted. My why was I wanted a career. I wanted to be placing. I wanted to be hired internationally to go teach. I wanted to make a name for myself in this community. And there was a lot of actions that I took to fuel that why coming to fruition.
Right.
I met my husband through this style of dance. We now have 2 kids. I'm pregnant with my third and our final one. We're not doing any more after this.
Oh.
But in my entry into motherhood, my ability, just even time ability, my energy ability to dedicate to dance changed.
Mm-hmm.
And for quite a while, I felt really frustrated that I wasn't able to go back to my original why because that why was it was a burning star in my gut that kept me going and motivated. And I just, in this time in my life, my time does not align with the time that I had prior to that. And so, in a coaching program that I was taking, more on entrepreneurship, she actually started to talk about at any point in a person's life when we change, we have a large change that happens, oftentimes our identity
Mm.
changes as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was, as a new mom, trying to still identify as the full-time traveling and working 40 weekends a year dancer.
Right.
But I had this whole other part of my life be birthed, which was motherhood and family and building something at home
Mm-hmm.
in that dynamic. And my identity started to shift. And so there was a part of me that had to let that old identity of full-time dancer Tashina die. And
Yeah.
there was some sadness and there was some grief around that.
Mm-hmm.
And that was part of my why had shifted. And now I was in the space of having to learn who this new identity was. How did I want to be in the world? Now being a mother and a dancer, a mother and a coach, a mother and a teacher.
Yeah.
What did that look like? But because my energy for a long time was so wrapped up on just going back to my original why, I couldn't even see the new identity that was available for me to start choosing. Like my energy, my mindset wasn't even able to contemplate what that might be because I was so focused on going back to the why. So I had to let that go. I had to let that compost itself so that it could fuel what this new part of my life was going to look like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's amazing. So inspiring. So inspiring because that process, while super difficult, is so normal for us as we go through so many changes in life. I mean, you go through so many changes out of high school, you see out of high school, out of college, you see a big transition there, as people are kind of finding themselves. Then you see another big transition in motherhood. Then you see another big transition at the end. And I'm sure you get this age group too, the end of motherhood and the end of career transition of who are you
Mhm.
going to be at this stage of your life? And that's a big, difficult transition for people too. And then, we see also maybe a loss of spouse transition that takes place even later on. And it's just all of these
Divorce is
transitions.
another one.
Divorce is another big one. And I think we meet people as teachers and as coaches during these transitions the most. I think we meet people during these times when they're searching for something. And so we have the unique ability to be with people during these difficult transitions and during these periods and during these phases. And it sounds like you were in a great coaching program during yours too. And it's like that's when you're really seeking out what is next for me? Who am I going to be next? And that's such a painful process, but also on the other side of it is when you see people just really become who they've always wanted to be. It's such a fascinating process to watch the before and the movement after. And it's incredible to hear your story and so inspiring and such a beautiful reminder that you can let a why go and you can have a new why. And it's
Mhm.
when you feel that friction, it's sometimes a friction to let you know, like you've accomplished that part of what you were looking for. And now it's time to look for the next thing that's going to drive and fuel you into the next amazing phase of your life.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. Tashina, this is such a fun conversation. Is there anything you want to leave with our listeners who might be in any of these phases of doubt or of imposter syndrome or of looking for more joy in their life to leave anybody on here?
Doing the inner reflection is totally worth it. And even if it brings up the shadow parts of yourself or the darker parts of yourself that you've avoided for years, if you really are wanting a different experience in the world or in your dancing, my encouragement would be to let yourself explore those parts of yourself so that you can have what you want. You are worthy of having what you want, and to give yourself the time and space to look at what might be holding you back and influencing the unwanted experience. Because once you know, then you have the power to do something about it.
Mm, beautiful.
So do it. Life is too short to just wish your life to be something different. We are, all of us, I think, very powerful co-creators, and we can have a large impact on the type of life that we have. So go that life that you want to have. I'm happy to talk with any individual that wants to explore more about the mindset one-on-one work I do. I've got a free West Coast Swing starter kit that gives people the ability to learn the basics of the dance from home, and then another set of instructional videos called the Launchpad. So I'll give you those two links if anyone's interested in learning West Coast Swing. There are communities literally all over the world, no matter where you go. So you can find communities to go social dancing and explore that if that's of interest too.
Amazing. I'll have all of Tashina's links in the show notes too, the links to work with her, to get in touch with her, and also these resources as well. Thank you, Tashina, so much for your time and for your inspiration today. I appreciate it so much. And I know there's somebody out there who heard exactly what they needed to hear today. So thank you so much for your time and your energy.
Thank you for having me.
All right, dancers, I hope you had so much fun with Tashina. I certainly was looking up West Coast Swing near me after speaking with her and hearing about this super fun art form. Don't forget to grab your free West Coast Swing starter kit from Tashina in the show notes to get started with West Coast Swing. Whether you decide to look up West Coast Swing or simply find solace that you are not alone in your struggles with learning ballet in adulthood, I hope you enjoyed this episode with Tashina so much. All right, dancers, I'll be back in your ears next week with another amazing episode. And until then, I wish you a very happy dancing.